Now for a look at our economic horizon, it's my distinct pleasure to announce our first keynote speaker, Silvia. John is the Wells Fargo Chief Economist, and as Bob mentioned, if you do have questions, please note that there are some cards that are at your table, and we'd like you to pass those forward, and we'll be asking those questions at the end. John's been with Wells Fargo since 2002. Prior to joining Wells Fargo, John was a senior economist for the U.S. Senate Joint Economic Committee, chief economist for the U.S. Senate Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, and a number of other prestigious positions. He's been recognized by a variety of sources. He's widely considered one of the country's most accurate economists, including being listed in Bloomberg's best forecast. I mean, it's your list. For areas including GDP, manufacturing, housing starts. And what I'm more really interested in is really the game that we had this last weekend. Was that just one day closer to the end of the season for the Carolina Panthers?
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yes. Yeah, definitely it was one of those classic stories. It's not how you start, but how you finish. And the fact that the Panthers had such a terrible time in the fourth quarter, I think told you a lot about the conditioning of the team. And that's, I'm sure, one thing that they're going to have to work on. Oftentimes it is said little things mean a lot. So I'm intrigued, okay? I mean, it's not every city that you get Pellegrino for the speakers. It's great stuff. Love it. I mean, it just could not fit any better. You know, it fits into that whole culture and everything. All the slides here are public information, so if you want to talk to your Wells Fargo contact, please feel free to get the slides and perhaps use them in some of your discussions, which I think are really, key going forward. I think there's a lot of interesting material that hopefully prompts some thought about what's going on. So I always do my presentation starting out with these 5 slides. It's what I use for the Wells Fargo ALCO asset liability meetings, the strategy meetings, the CCAR meetings, the stress test, as many of you might say, all the meetings. Because I think if you got these 5 fundamentals in line, you sort of understand what's happening with the national economy, and then we'll turn over to the California economy. But the first thing, of course, is economic growth, what's happening with growth, what's happening with inflation, a little bit on interest rates, some comments on profits in the dollar, and that's the macro forecast. So before you think about what's going on at the local level, you need to think about that macro economy and how it's moving going forward. We do see here some expectations. I do think we have sustained trend growth. I was not upset by last Friday's employment number. Yes, it was weaker than trend, but you got to remember, year to date, we're still running around 200,000, 210,000 per month. That's a pretty solid number. So again, it looks pretty good. We do see here, as you see, employment cyclical and structural. There is a lot of structural unemployment. And I think the Federal Reserve is starting to realize that more and more all the time. There was some commentary maybe 2 or 3 years ago that the Fed had said, well, most of this unemployment is pretty much cyclical, but no, it's structural. There's a lot of problems, and I don't know those of you that are in education realize there's a lot of people out there who need education to get them to the next level or the next job or the next position in their career. So I'm sure educators are very familiar with that. We're still cautious on consumer segments. You'll see some graphs on that. And again, I'm sure in terms of housing and multifamily, I'm sure Webcor and Lennar are very familiar with this. In fact, this is one of the topics we've actually discussed here the last 2 or 3 years. Housing affordability and the issues about geography in the city. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about state and local governments, but also unsustainable long-run fiscal policy. It's, again, a topic we've talked about here before, last 3 or 4 years, where when you look at the Congressional Budget Office, you look at entitlements in the United States, we just can't pay the bill. We don't have the money to pay these bills. And how we're going to deal with that is a big question in our society going forward. So you can see here, I'd like to, when we have growth, one of the interesting aspects of economic growth in the last few years, and especially commentary a lot of people have made about, gee, this whole pattern seems so much weaker than what we had in the past. And I think when you break out the domestic private sector and the government sector, you have a real good feeling, oh yeah, now I understand what the heck is going on here. Because you can see in the blue line there, that's the private sector. For those of you with undergraduate economics, that's the C plus the I. And you can see consumer spending, business investment is positive, but not quite as strong as it was in the past. What really distinguishes this economic period, or this economic recovery or expansion, is the fact that the black line still is below zero. That the government sector, on average, is still a detractor from the overall thrust of the economy. Again, a lot of restructuring going on at state and local governments. I'm sure California, you're all familiar with that. But states like New Jersey, Illinois, are all coming to grips with, what can we actually afford at the state level. So again, you're trying to understand what goes on beyond the GDP numbers. You start to understand the distinction in the private and the public sector and how significant that is. For small businesses, very good signs. Continued improvement. Two surveys illustrated here. One is the Wells Fargo survey, and another is the National Federation of Independent Businesses. You have a sense here, is there improvement? Yes. Are we back to where we were in 2007, 2006, 2005? No. So again, it's that subtlety, that nuance when you look at economics. Improvement, yes. Back to where we were before? No. Again, kind of an important understanding that, yeah, we're making progress, we're moving ahead, things are getting ahead. Sometimes you'll read somewhere, they'll say, well, we haven't gotten anywhere. That's baloney, okay? We have gotten places, all right? We are improving. Now, sometimes our expectations are pretty high, but you can see the improvement here, and I think that's key. In this graph, this is for the big companies. This is the ISM manufacturing survey. And if you notice here in this graph, we're doing pretty well. Very typically, this series really zooms up in the early phase of an economic recovery. You'll notice this, for example, in 2004, 2006, and then it sort of settles down. And now we're seeing continued improvement. So we have momentum, particularly in the manufacturing sector in the United States. I think that's overall very, very key. This is jobless claims. Many people will ask me if I had to depend upon one economic indicator, this is it. Jobless claims now are running about 300,000, which is a very low level in the United States. Again, this is state jobless claims. It's a leading economic indicator. It's published every Thursday morning in the United States, except for Thanksgiving. But when you look at this number, you can see how far we have come in terms of economic improvement. Pretty impressive. Now, sometimes you'll hear the comment, well, we've recaptured all the jobs we have lost in the recession. We're back to where we were before. Yes, if you're counting the number of jobs. But you'll notice here the labor market in the United States has changed pretty significantly because a large portion of those jobs are part-time jobs. So sometimes you're thinking, well, if we've recaptured all the jobs, why aren't these consumers happy and spending like crazy like they did in the past? Well, because a lot of them are part-time jobs. And you'll notice again, and I would argue to you, we could come back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, this will be a more permanent characteristic of the United States, that more and more people are doing part-time jobs for a lot of reasons. Yes, some of them would like to have full-time jobs, but a lot of people have part-time jobs because they like part-time jobs. That's what they want. It fits into their lifestyle. It fits into the responsibilities they have for family. So again, it's kind of intriguing when you see that underlying change going on in the United States. Yes, it's easy to say we've recaptured all the jobs, but we also realize that a lot of the jobs now are part-time jobs, not really full-time jobs. Here is another challenge to our society. This is labor force participation rate for both men and women. And I know some of you in Wells Fargo have seen me talk about this graph because, again, it's very key in our society. And what it shows is both male and female participation rates have declined in the last 5 to 10 years. All right, now that's really significant because, as many of you probably know, and some of you probably have experienced, ever since the late 1960s, early 1970s, more and more women went to college and got an education. And what happened was they joined the labor force. All right? Now, Andrew, I'm not sure why you're here again, because we already discussed this the other day. So I'm not sure why you're here. You just taking more notes, or what's the story? Andrew wrote a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle. The parts that said that I was brilliant and smart, and those are good. The other parts I'm not sure about. Anyway, but what's key here is you've got to remember, what has American society experienced since the 1970s? More and more women getting educated, getting a job. But if you see in this graph, what's happened to female participation rates since 2007, 2010? It's actually been going down. Now, if you think about the United States being able to produce 3.5%, 4% GDP, gross domestic product, and you say, wow, male and female participation rates are going down, doesn't that mean that as a society we have less ability to get to the 3.5%, 4%? Absolutely. Absolutely. It says that our potential, and you'll see this, for example, when Chair Yellen does her presentation in a press conference, people will say, well, do you think the potential growth rate in the United States is going down? You see this in CBO reports. And the answer is yes. And if our potential is going down, it's less able as a society to produce what we thought we were going to produce before. So here is a real good sign. And I know a lot of you have heard about labor force participation rates falling. They fell last Friday, just a tiny bit, but they did decline. And you can see underlying this, there's a lot of different demographic data that I think is rather fascinating. Here's your unemployment rates. The U3 and the U6, both high relative to where we were before, and both high relative to what the Fed would like to see. So again, the Fed stays easier for a little bit longer period of time. This is consumer spending, remarkably stable. Consumers are spending money. But if you notice very subtly here on this diagram, notice that the level is just a little bit less than what it was here. So again, that kind of sense that this level being a little bit less, that's the credit change, that's the home equity loan argument. Yes, in the last decade, you could get the home equity loan and people bought big screen TVs, all right? They did a lot of interesting stuff. Now you don't have that as much. So is the consumer spending money? Yes. Are they spending as much as they did in the prior decade? No, right? Because they're not using the home as the cash register. Again, a very key change in American society. This is a graph I referred to earlier, and some of you have seen this before. So this is what's happened since 1984 in after-tax income. Now, we only care about after-tax income because that's what the consumer spends. And here in this diagram, you can see very clearly the differential growth rates in income. And surprising to a lot of people, the lowest 20% has had the fastest growth in after-tax income because basically they're not getting taxed. Remember, ever since Reagan, we've sort of taken out that bottom tier of income, and it's not being taxed. So this is the most, and then the highest 20% is that. So all that 99%, 1% is a whole bunch of political nonsense. Okay, that's just not the way it is. All right. So this is more interesting because this helps explain things. This is Walmart. This is Target. This is TJ Maxx. This is Ross Stores. This is Michael Kors. All right. This is all those fancy stores. And this is JCPenney. And this is Sears. And this is Kmart. This helps explain the changing momentum for different types of American consumers. If it was 99%, 1%, then no one would be going to Walmart. Walmart would be empty, and that's not happening. So what you see here in this diagram is a good representation of the differential consumer spending patterns that have gone on for the last 10 or 20 years. And then notice this graph. This is since 2007. All right, again, it's kind of fascinating. Now you can see, all right, again, who's had the most growth? It's this fourth 20%. Basically somewhere between 90,000 and 120,000 household income. This is, again, this part of society, again, not catching up, not keeping up. And remember, another challenge, too, is this is nominal income. So if I were to take the inflation number out, this would be even a more negative number. So again, you can see here the differential consumer behavior that's happened since the economic recession and how things really are very uneven And again, it's not a story about 99.1%. That's not productive. That's not a good discussion. This is more meaningful in terms of how different segments of our society are performing. I think it's very interesting if you're in the consumer business. Housing starts continuing to recover. But this is, again, a fascinating graph. Mostly it's fascinating because I did it, but some of us have talked about this before. And I'm sure, again, when you deal with Webcor and Lennar, they'll reinforce this whole thing. One of the most fascinating things is you've seen that ever since the 1980s, we kept on building bigger and bigger homes across the United States. And what was also happening is we get smaller and smaller families. Very interesting phenomenon. Most of us, our grandparents, maybe had 4 or 5 kids. Parents had 3 or 4. We have 3 or 2, and our kids are talking about 1 or 2. All right? So what's been happening is we built a lot of homes. My wife and I lived in a town called Naperville, Illinois, and it's in the suburbs of Chicago. And when we got to Naperville in 1982, what you saw there, our house is basically 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath, 1-car garage. By the time we left Naperville, everybody was building 5,000, 6,000 square foot homes, 3-car garages. It was amazing. For those of you that are familiar with the suburbs of Chicago, it was just a huge push out into DeKalb and DuPage and Will counties. And I think you've seen a lot of this in other major cities. Kansas City's another one that's classic. Indianapolis is another one of these classic cities where Atlanta. If you ever seen a map in the old days of the Atlanta metropolitan area, it's really tiny. Now the Atlanta metropolitan area extends into Alabama. So what was happening is we kept on building bigger and bigger homes further from the cities. People were driving 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles to work, taking trains. In the Boston area, people take the train into Boston from Providence to work every day. All right? So again, it's a change in our society. But what we failed to realize is the families kept on getting smaller and smaller. And so this urbanization, this willingness, certainly in San Francisco, but you see it even in a city like Charlotte, where I live. Huge number of young people who are perfectly happy living downtown and have 1 or 2 children and are living downtown. Condominiums, small spaces, very, very different change in our society. Good progress here in terms of negative equity share by state. We've really made progress in that area. So a lot less people are, quote, underwater. And then commercial real estate. And this is, again, notice what's happened in terms of the surprise in apartments. It took years for the production of apartments to catch up with supply. And notice those apartment vacancy rates are lower today than they were prior to the financial crisis. Notice the industrial rates continue to go down. The light blue area that you see here is the absorption, which basically for an economist is demand. That just tells me how much demand we have. And notice the demand for industrial space still exceeds the supply. So the vacancy rate continues to come down. So those 2 areas in commercial real estate really show you good strength on the national level. Here's 2 areas that haven't improved all that much on the national level. Office and, again, retail. Retail, again, a lot of excess strip malls out there, sitting out there. Not a lot of activity happening here. Not much activity happening here, but again, that excess supply is out there in commercial real estate. Here's inflation. Inflation is rising. Yes, it's low, but it's rising. I think that's very subtle. It's very important in economics to realize the difference there. Sometimes you'll hear people say interest rates are low. Yeah, interest rates are low, but they're rising. That tells you something. In economics, it's the movement of factors over time that tell me what's going on. And the fact that something's low is not useful information. What I really want to know is what direction this thing is going. And so inflation is rising modestly. Again, something we discussed last year, once again, this problem about inflation rates still exceeding the rates of return that many savers get. So again, if you have the consumer price index today, running, let's say, around 2%, you have to go all the way out to your 3- and 4-year treasury, 5-year treasury to be able to compensate for that. So all those money market funds, all right, all those savings certificates that people have, the 1-year T-bills, 2-year treasuries, all of those, they're basically behind in inflation. So again, you can see one of our great challenges in our society there. Corporate bond issuance, again, very strong here. Look at the difference. This is our crisis. And we've got a lot more corporate finance going on today than we ever had before. Again, a lot of corporations taking advantage of that. High yield, the same story, a lot of strong investment spending there, and bank loans. Again, lending peaking up higher than what we had in the prior peak. So there's a lot of financing actually going on out there, certainly at the corporate level. And corporate profits, again, I to emphasize once again, you'll notice that ever since NAFTA, this little blue area, the global profits, continues to go. Globalization continues to be very, very important for U.S. corporations. I know politically you got a lot of people yelling and screaming about globalization. That's nice, got it. But for the U.S. companies, we still earned up more and more profits abroad every year than we did in the past. And the U.S. is the largest world's exporter. So again, that's key to understand. And these are some of the companies, some of the names you might recognize that have over 50% of their sales abroad. So we truly do have an economy that is quite globalized in terms of what's going on. Another good thing is non-financial corporations actually know what they're doing. You look at this graph and you realize our non-financial corporate profits are much higher than they ever were in 2006, 2007. So our companies actually do know what they're doing. Right? They actually are profitable. They're making money. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And again, the long-term unsustainable federal budget problem that we talk about, and its entitlements. All right? That's what it is, and that's what we have to come to grips with eventually. We can't keep avoiding that discussion. We really need to deal with the entitlements. We don't have the money to pay the bills. The latest Social Security Trustees Fund report that came out earlier this year says as far as the disability payments go, all right, we don't have the money in 3 years to pay disability payments. So all you people on disability, I'm not sure we're going to get your money, but we don't have the money to pay you. All right, and we know that we don't have the money to pay Medicare, and we don't have the money to pay Social Security. Good luck. Find out what happens. So again, some summary. And this is California and San Francisco. Too much happiness and joy. Again, same story as the last 2 years. You're outpacing the state and the nation with per capita income, the labor market, and the housing market. We'll have some graphs on that. Multifamily, again, particularly strong, but you'd expect that. Housing affordability remains an issue. Strong per capita income and well-educated workforce, again, boosting the economy. Things going on. So here's your California. There's your GDP numbers. Again, outpacing the U.S. overall for California. This is the non-farm payroll employment here. Once again, you're even stronger here than you were here. Back almost to the dot-com boom that you had in the past. So again, very strong employment gains overall. And this is by industry. And once again, just as a reminder, I mean, if you want this graph updated, for example, or some of these graphs updated in 3 to 6 months, please contact your Wells Fargo person. We'll get the graph updated for you. But you can see, again, a broad-based gain in terms of jobs overall. And then the unemployment rate continuing to come down. That gap is getting smaller and smaller all the time with respect to the U.S. And then housing permits, and once again, you're just running into problems here. Your gap in terms of the core logic home price index, continuing to see a wider and wider gap in home prices relative to the national average. Tax revenues, your volatility, this has been a long time problem in California. The volatility and the way your tax structure is, especially in personal income tax, capital gains, stock options, tech industry, that volatility is a long-term issue for the state. And then the metro area, these are sort of 4 cities that sort of border the ocean, different oceans, but it's water anyway. But you can see here that the vast improvement in all these cities. We always used to make fun of Miami and how no one would show up there anymore, but boy, it certainly has made a big difference. And then per capita income for some of the comparison cities. For San Francisco and California, United States, and so when you people complain about the rich people, you're complaining about yourself. So, I don't want to hear it. Always remember, Pellegrino. So, gotta love it, right? But, and again, it is frustrating. It's much like I've said before in the past. I mean, it does create, as Andrew said, problems with prosperity. I mean, that's the challenge you have. I mean, it's just an amazing process. Housing permits, but once again, you can see the San Francisco CoreLogic, you're down here, but boy, it really picked up pretty dramatically. And then negative equity, here's your California experience. Here's your San Francisco experience. It was good that we had to fudge the graph to make sure there was a 0 in there so we could actually see the number for San Francisco. And your foreclosure rate, again, phenomenally low. Again, just a prospect of prosperity. Commercial real estate all going down. But you know what I found fascinating about this graph is look at this, look at the warehouse number. I mean, I'm not sure what's going on, but you're storing a lot of stuff somewhere. I'm not sure what it is, but that vacancy rate has come down really dramatically in the last year and a half. Phenomenal. But you notice here again, if you think back to the earlier graph, how all of these are coming down, which is really fascinating. All right, there's really been a nice improvement. I mean, your office vacancy rate coming down, pretty sharply here. So again, supply and demand. Here's your office supply and demand. Notice once again that vacancy rate continues to improve. Your office demand, your absorption rates compared to other cities. Your apartment, again, not enough apartments, and sure as heck, not enough warehouse space. My goodness, I'm not sure what you're doing. Storing a lot of paper, maybe. I don't know. But industrial net absorptions. So a lot of detail, and this is the one I complain to at Wells Fargo all the time. I got the hotel occupancy rate. I mean, I remember we talked about this the last couple of years. I mean, look at this darn thing. I mean, I got, San Francisco at 84%, and the rest of the U.S. is like 68. So no wonder I can't get a room, It's terrible here at a decent price. My buddy Michael and I we were here the last 2 nights and doing some business and everything. And Michael will tell you, we had to do a Days Inn. What town was that? Way down the road there, south of it's terrible. Anyway, so there you go. Your hotel occupancy rate, absolutely packed, absolutely full. It's amazing when you look at this graph. Population with a college degree, yeah, you're not average, you're not normal here. This is way out, But again, you can see what the kind of cities that you're dealing with out here, and again, compare that to the United States. So again, a very, very different demographic in terms of what you're looking at in society. So that's it. That's pretty much comments, and this is a lot of reports that we publish. But I would just, a couple of points to really emphasize. One, you are an unusual city. You don't have a lot of cities that you can compare yourselves with. So that makes you a little bit unique in many ways. Second, we can get any of these graphs updated. I think that is absolutely key. So in 3 or 6 months and 9 months from now, contact Peter or somebody on his team and say, hey, we'd like to get a graph or 2 updated. So one of the questions Andrew asked me, and I've been really, really lucky last few days. I do read a lot. As you suspect, but one of the questions Andrew asked me is, what are the risks? And so here's what I would read as sort of the biggest risk, and you can sort of get it. This is from the Financial Times, and if anybody wants the references, just send me the email. I'll send you the references. This is from Financial Times, a piece wrote by a fellow named Philip Stevens, and he says very simply, as for the digitalized world, the idea that everyone everywhere should have access to the same information has run afoul of authoritarian politics and concerns about privacy. China, Russia, Turkey, and others have thrown roadblocks across the digital highway to stifle dissent. Europeans want to protect themselves from U.S. intelligence agencies and monopoly capitalism of the digital giants. The web is heading for balkanization. Now, if you think about San Francisco and tech and San Jose, think about the implicit assumption that everybody wants to talk more about everything all the time, and they can do it. And they're willing to pay for the capacity to do it. That's a huge assumption. What happens if you break down that assumption? And people all of a sudden say, well, I know about Target. I know about Home Depot. Should I really be using my credit card to buy something online? Should I be using my credit card? Should I be using my phone to be buying something? Maybe there's a risk there that I'm not attached to. Yesterday on CNBC in the morning, the comment earlier, CNBC, the fellow was commenting that people do not take security seriously enough, right? And you know, we all sort of say, well, you know, that's Los Angeles, all right? Some starlet or two put their stupid pictures on and all of a sudden they're everywhere. But you think about, you know, I assume that when those people did that, they made a huge assumption that that stuff was safe. Suppose it's not. Suppose any picture anybody ever took and put on a web page or whatever it is now is universal. What impact does that have on your technology? It's fascinating. Barron's, I mean, I was sheer luck, okay? It's amazing. I mean, this Financial Times piece is dated September 4th. Amazing, right? So here's Barron's, September 6th. When will we get serious about security on the web? Again, you think about, all right, we're assuming that we're getting all these fantastic technology and we can do all this stuff, but if we get security problems, all right? You know, somebody does something based upon somebody's posting on Facebook. All of a sudden, there's all kinds of lawsuits, all right? Somebody does something and the phone doesn't work right. What happens? It's just fascinating. Another one, this is Wall Street Journal, September 7th. The internet power vacuum worsens. Wow, I mean, for me, the timing was amazing, right? Being asked to come to San Francisco, do this presentation, and saying, okay, I'm looking at your economy, and it's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. No doubt about it. A lot of educated people, beautiful city, great restaurants. Michael and I went to a place, an oyster bar or something. I'm from New England. I was amazed. I was like, wow, this place is really cool. You know, small little place, but great food. And a lot of brilliant people doing great things. And then you think about, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on underneath this whole thing? What about this web security? What about this personalization? What's going on here? So again, as Andrew asked me, you know what one of the risks? That's one of the risks. That you assume that all this stuff is going to do and everything's happiness and joy. What happens if, well, I can't use my credit card, so I can't be buying things online. I don't want to post pictures anymore. So do I really need all that gigabyte, whatever the heck it is, capacity? Because I'm not going to do anything on my phone in terms of pictures. All right, interesting challenges. So I'm open to questions, comments, challenges. A lot of stuff. I know Shelley had a couple of things. Shelley was interesting, you know. I was telling her that I've done this several years, and she said, wow, you know, this is always cool, and this is the first time she's been here. And now she's going to say, John, you're just terrible in presentations. But, and then she said, and then I said, well, maybe we could do it in other places, maybe like Los Angeles. And Shelley said, no, I'm not going to do Los Angeles. She's not going to go to Los Angeles. I don't know why. I must have been an old boyfriend kind of thing, but you know, it is what it is. Go ahead, Peter. You got a question? Yes, sir.
Do I have a question? There it is. Okay. Why are you here?
Why am I here?
No, that wasn't the question. Sorry, wrong question. That was my question. Will $15 minimum wage impact economic development? How?
Okay. So here's the perspective. Always matters in terms of the minimum wage. My reading of the studies is that, yes, it matters for lower educated, less skilled workers. That's what it matters for. They will have their unemployment rates rise. Now, in a city like this, what I would suspect is that for most merchants dealing with a very affluent population, they will be able to pass that cost on. So what you will see is in the restaurants and places like that, prices will rise a little bit, they will get paid, and the impact will probably be fairly small relative to other cities. Now, if you were to tell me, let's put up a higher minimum wage in Scranton, Pennsylvania, then you're going to have a real problem, because that population will not support the higher prices. All right, so that's, again, a very important distinction I think you have to make. I see a lot of people saying, well, you know, I don't see the big evidence that it makes a big national difference. No, it wouldn't make a big national difference. It would make a difference in low-skilled, lower educated workers. That's what the substitution is. One of the examples, again, I point out to a lot of people, and you may not see it in this place, but when you go in New York, near the Wells Fargo office in Midtown, there's a Panera Bread place, all right? It is an au bon pain, a very exclusive French restaurant. And when you go into an au bon pain, you don't have order takers anymore, if you ever noticed that. You walk in, there's this little screen, and you tap on the screen, and you pick out exactly what you want. Now, not only does it improve the fact that you probably get exactly what you thought you ordered, again, which is a problem, but you know what's happened? You've eliminated the human element for taking that order. And so there's that substitution for technology that's coming in that you probably will see in reaction to part of the minimum wage. So some of the restaurants you go to today will probably have those little screens in 2 or 3 years when you pass that higher minimum wage. All right, that's what the substitution is. Go ahead, Peter, another question.
Is San Francisco in a bubble? How do we grow from here if the millennials and the tech startups who are driving the economy can't afford to live here?
Well, my honest opinion is I would reverse that, all right? It is the tech millennials who will afford to live here. I think I made this comment last year, and I'll probably make it next year as well. The challenge you have is where you're going to get the service workers. Where you're going to get those $35,000, $40,000, $45,000 workers, how are they going to get to work in San Francisco? That, I think, is your real challenge. They can no longer afford to live in the city. Again, talking with Andrew, I mentioned, well, maybe companies will get together and start having buses coming in from the suburbs. They'll bus their workers in from the big suburbs. They'll pick 4 or 5 places and say, you meet us here at the city, and we'll just bus you in. One of the interesting things that I saw in the suburbs of Chicago, I would catch a very early train in from Naperville, and the train was loaded with, people like me at the time, working in financial services. And obviously these were suburbs. They're very nice suburbs kind of places, probably not as fancy as yours. But one of the interesting things was when we got off that train, a whole bunch of cleaning ladies got on. All those Polish cleaning ladies would get on the train in the Chicago, and they would go out to the suburbs to clean the houses of the people in the suburbs. And I suspect that probably more and more you'll see that in San Francisco. I mean, you look at some of these income numbers, some of these apartment rental numbers. I mean, you've got to see that this thing is coming. So I would suspect, Peter, that what will happen is companies will say, hey, I cannot afford to get the workers who do some of these things, and they can't live in the city. I'm going to have some buses come in. I'm going to work with other people and see. Go ahead. You had another question.
There was a clarification question. When speaking of San Francisco stats, is this just city of San Francisco? If not, how much of the graph included the greater area?
Yeah, most of this data is for the metropolitan area, not the city per se. Yeah, and again, it's simply because the data can be more consistent over time.
What international trends or issues concern or excite you the most?
I would go back to the Financial Times article, the balkanization of information, the inability to process or access information in different places. What can you not do? Again, a sense that there's, I guess, less. I know some people complain about globalization, but from an economics point of view, a diminishing of the globalization is probably the biggest concern I have. The lack of trust for a lot of people. I got to believe that because of all this ISIS stuff, airport security is going to get tougher. It's going to be more and more difficult to move people between countries. I think that'll be a challenge.
Thank you. What are the economic impacts of hosting the Olympics in San Francisco?
Okay, kind of actually an interesting question from my point of view. All right, so here's the way I see it. All right, and I know there's some people here. I think the number one issue you need to deal with, and I would suggest to you, go to Rio. I don't think Los Angeles or Atlanta are good examples. Though they were successful Olympics, but it's Rio you want to focus in on. Rio is a very dense city, and I don't know how many of you have ever been to Rio. The one thing that really surprised me in Rio is that it's much like San Francisco. You're dealing with a peninsula. You're dealing with going from one part of the city. I don't know if you've ever been to Rio. When you go, I did not realize Copacabana Beach and Ipanema Beach are extremely different. They're on the opposite sides of this huge mountain. You have to go through a tunnel to get through from one to the other. Now, you could stay on the beach, but you have to go through a tunnel if you're going to drive a car. I think the number one issue, and I would definitely have a delegation from San Francisco to go to Rio. Ask them, how are you solving your transportation problem? Because that is the number one challenge you're going to have in San Francisco. How the heck are you going to move all these people on these overcrowded roads already? How are you going to move those people? Second, obviously, we joke about hotel occupancy. But again, to me, you're going to have to use every university dorm room possible. You got a whole bunch of universities here, and all those dorm rooms are going to be really full, and you better make sure that you've got a very good contract with the university on using all those dorm rooms. And then, of course, now that you got everybody in these dorm rooms, how are you going to move them to different sites? How are you going to get them on a bus to get all these different places? So, yes, it can be done. It's nice to think that some of the most successful Olympics anybody has ever had have been the American Olympics in Atlanta and Los Angeles. That somehow Americans do know how to manage things and get things done. I know we make fun of ourselves all the time. We don't know how to do a darn thing. We screw up everything. But the reality is we actually do know what we're doing. But I would say the number one things is you've got to figure out the transportation and the lodging issues for San Francisco. Because if I were on the committee, on the Olympic committee, looking at you, I'm going to say, hey, I've been to San Francisco. I've sat on a one-on-one for 3.5 hours, went 2 miles. How the hell are you going to move all these people all over the place all the time? What are you going to do for transportation? And Rio might be a good example for you. When Rio does its Olympics, how are they dealing with the transportation? How are they dealing with the lodging? Again, for those of you that have been to Rio or Copacabana, all those hotels are on the beaches. So host hotels are going to have all the Olympic people. Now, how the heck are you going to move everybody at the same time for all the different events? So I would do that. But remember, in Atlanta and Los Angeles, they were successful, but we had good management. And again, I'm not sure who's going to run this show. Not me. I ain't going to do that. No, don't ask me. But I think those two things I would say would be the real keys. If I were on the Olympic Committee, that would be my challenge to you. How are you going to deal with housing, and how are you going to deal with transportation? Go ahead, Peter.
There's a couple of questions that are somewhat tied together with regard to part-time jobs.
Yes.
You suggested that this reflects worker preference.
Yes.
Could it be a way for companies or employers to save money?
Yes.
Or could it be that there are people accepting these jobs that are overqualified, and what is going to be the long-term trend for that?
Yes.
Good.
I think it's very important. In our society, there is a tendency to sort of blame some set of people or whatever it is for whatever it is that's going on. To me, I see a lot of people willing to work part-time who want to work part-time and don't want to work full-time. I see a lot of companies who really have figured out that all they need to do is hire some part-time workers. They don't really need to hire a lot of full-time workers. And again, you can go through a list of restaurants and hotels, and there you have it. So I think it's a two-way street. Both the supply and the demand side have limits. Now, I think your other point is very subtle, very interesting. All right? Yes, I have no doubt. All right? I'll just say, when I walk into the Starbucks, all right, that's on Montgomery Street, before I have some meeting at Wells Fargo, because if I don't have the coffee, I'll fall asleep at the meeting at Wells Fargo, because some of those banker meetings are just, anyway. But no doubt, I have no doubt whatsoever that the person who's making the coffee and taking the order, the barista and all that stuff, they're overeducated for that job, right? I am always amazed, and maybe some of you are, those baristas, how the heck can they keep track of 5 or 6 very complicated orders and make them all at the same time? It's like, whoa, lady, congratulations to you, because you really know what the heck you're doing. Yes, I think one challenge is, yes, we do have a lot of underemployed people, people who have far more education relative to the job. No doubt about it, Peter. I agree with you. And that, again, whenever you see an economic phenomenon, always think of complexity. There really isn't a simple solution. It's like somebody saying, watching some NFL game and says, well, why the heck didn't the quarterback just throw the ball to that guy? Because he was open. Well, there were probably 6 or 7 other things going on at the same time. The world is complicated. And I never trust all these people with these, quote, simple answers to things. It's just very complicated. And the labor market, especially in the United States, I hope you appreciate, is far more complicated than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Go ahead, Peter.
You mentioned earlier a little bit about education in your last piece. And
yes, sir.
The question comes forward. Are there any important educational areas we need to focus on for the next 10 to 15 years to make sure that we are educating people in the right direction for the workforce?
Yeah. The right direction, I think, is really key. And again, my generation, going through the late 60s, early 70s in college, I always make the comment, and some of you probably will appreciate this. As I was going through school, it never dawned on us. We always thought we were really smart, and we graduated from college, we got a job right away, and we thought it was us, and it had nothing to do with us. It had to do with the fact that there was nobody in front of us that went to college. So when we were graduating, there was no World War II generation to compete with. And if you remember a lot of the 1950s, 1960s, a lot of kids did not go to college. For those of you that ever remember the movie American Graffiti, at the end of the movie, there was only one boy on that plane that left that town. Everybody else stayed there. So when I was graduating, to me, having a college degree, people thought, wow, you got a college degree, you must be smart, here's a manager job. Right? Here's a job. You do here, you go into training, everything else. I think the challenge you have now, Peter, is that people graduating today have 2 or 3 generations in front of them that have been to college. Having a college degree is no longer unique. And I think a second thing that my generation screwed up with our children is that we thought just going to college was a great idea. We never thought, wow, we should have majored in this, that, or the other thing. I think it's only now that people are starting to realize, going to a 2nd or 3rd rate college and majoring in sociology is probably not a good idea to take out $60,000 worth of student loans. Now, you want to do engineering at Stanford, take out $60,000, rock on. Nobody has problems with that. But again, as an economist, it comes back to what's your expected rate of return on your education relative to the cost. If you're studying engineering at Stanford, you need to take out $60,000 of loans, you're probably going to earn the money back, right? But if many of you have the same thing. I don't know to what extent you do this, but when I drive down the roads in like North Carolina and Virginia, and I see a green sign on the sign and the side of the road and it says such and such a college, I never heard of the darn thing. And I'm thinking, who goes there, right? And you think about, are you going to study anthropology at a 3rd-rate college? Where are you going to get the job? You're not going to happen. But people do this because we don't think, again, it really aggravates me. Time and time again, you see these ads and say, well, college is expensive. Baloney. College is an investment. You need to treat it as an investment. It's not an expense. All right? When you think about it as an investment, you ask yourself, what's my expected rate of return relative to my cost? So am I done now? Is that it?
No,
one more question? Okay.
What is your expected rate of return? I'm still waiting.
Yeah, wow.
Last question. With the continued growth of San Francisco,
yes.
How do we balance the best place to live with the best place to work?
Yeah, that is your challenge. It's been your challenge for 3 or 4 years because you see those graphs. It is. How do you provide for the diversity of the population? My comment last night to Michael when we went out to that restaurant was, wow, this is an actual neighborhood. It was still in San Francisco. I'm not sure where in San Francisco, but it's like, wow, this is an actual, yeah, that is your huge challenge. How do you make certain areas affordable? How do you provide the transportation for people to get back and forth to work? Again, I would say that is a challenge, but once again, I think it's important to recognize it is a challenge and that you need to start doing something about it for the next 3 to 5 or 20 years. And again, try to, it's nice to be a very, very fashionable city and everybody wants a Fifth Avenue kind of place, but the people that work in the stores on Fifth Avenue have to live someplace too. So, again, no easy answers, pal. But as you suspect, if you know that there's a problem, you can work on it. But again, you know, you've got a couple of builders here that probably give you some insight on how they're dealing with the problem. A transportation person probably here trying to deal with the problem. So these are the kind of folks right up front that are dealing with it. Anyway, thanks for your time and attention and your questions.